Marta and the Town. My name is Marta, and until recently, I lived a quiet and uneventful life in a small town nestled in the countryside. The kind of place where everyone knows each other and nothing out of the ordinary ever happens. After a particularly difficult year, I decided it was time for a change, a fresh start. That's when I stumbled upon an old, century-old house on the outskirts of town. It was charming in its own way, with its creaky wooden floors and vintage architecture. It felt like the perfect place to begin anew. First signs of paranormal activity. It wasn't long after I moved in that I started noticing strange things. At first, it was small, almost insignificant occurrences. One evening, I was unpacking in the living room when I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, like someone calling my name. I brushed it off as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Then, objects began to move on their own. I would leave a book on the coffee table, only to find it on the floor the next morning. The kitchen cabinets would creak open by themselves, and lights flickered without any apparent electrical issues. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and checked every room, but found nothing. The most unsettling experience happened late one night. I was sitting in the living room, reading, when I saw a shadow move across the wall, distinct and human-like, but there was no one else in the house. I froze, my eyes wide with terror, as the shadow seemed to linger before disappearing into the darkness. Marta's initial reaction. At first, I tried to rationalize these events. I told myself that old houses creak and groan, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe the whispers were just the wind, and the footsteps were the house settling. I even considered that I might be sleep-deprived, causing me to see and hear things that weren't there. But deep down, a gnawing fear began to take root. The more I tried to ignore it, the more frequent and intense the occurrences became. It was becoming impossible to deny that something was very, very wrong with the house. Escalation of events. Increase in paranormal activity. As the days turned into weeks, the paranormal activity in the house grew more frequent and intense. It felt as if the house was alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy. The whispers that had once been faint and sporadic now filled the night, voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, surrounding me in an eerie, unescapable chorus. Furniture began to move with alarming regularity. I would wake up to find chairs overturned and tables shifted. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a loud crash from the living room. I rushed down to find the heavy antique mirror that had hung on the wall shattered on the floor, even though it had been securely mounted. The apparitions of dark figures became a nightly occurrence. They would appear in the corners of rooms, their forms shifting and indistinct, but undeniably there. Once, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Paralyzed with fear, I could do nothing but stare until it finally faded away. Investigation of the house's history. Driven by fear and a desperate need for answers, I decided to investigate the history of the house. I started with the local library, poring over old newspapers and town records. It didn't take long to uncover a series of tragedies associated with the property. There were reports of unexplained deaths, disappearances, and even rumors of occult rituals conducted by a previous owner. I found an old diary hidden in a compartment behind a loose brick in the basement. The entries were chilling, detailing the experiences of a former resident who had also encountered strange and terrifying events. The diary ended abruptly with a final, scrawled entry that simply read, "They are here." I also spoke with some of the older residents in town who reluctantly shared stories passed down through generations. They spoke of the house being cursed, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. These stories painted a picture of a house steeped in darkness, a magnet for the supernatural. Desperation and isolation. The more I uncovered, the more desperate I became. The events in the house were no longer just frightening, they were relentless. I started to lose sleep, unable to find peace even in the daylight. My friends and neighbors, initially sympathetic, began to distance themselves. They thought I was imagining things, or worse, losing my mind. Isolation set in. I felt trapped, both physically and mentally. The house was a prison, its dark history and sinister inhabitants slowly eroding my sanity. I doubted my own senses, questioning what was real and what was a figment of my increasingly fragile mind. I was alone, caught in a nightmare from which there seemed no escape, with only the malevolent spirits for company. Paranormal climax. The house reached a breaking point one night, as if it could no longer contain the malevolent forces within. It started with a cacophony of noises, screeching doors, crashing furniture, and a deep, guttural growl resonating through the walls. The air grew cold and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Shadows twisted and coiled around the room, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe with malevolent intent. In the midst of this chaos, I was confronted by the very essence of the house's darkness. As I huddled in the corner of the living room, the temperature plummeted and a dense fog rolled in from the corners of the room. The fog solidified into a figure, a tall, shadowy presence with eyes that burned like embers. It advanced toward me with a slow, deliberate pace, its form shifting as if it were made of smoke and darkness. The figure reached out with a ghostly hand, and a surge of terror overwhelmed me. I felt an icy grip on my heart, as if the very soul of the house was trying to pull me into its void. My screams echoed through the empty house, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The entity's voice echoed in my mind, whispering threats and promises of eternal suffering. The encounter felt like an eternity, but as abruptly as it began, it ended, leaving me alone in a room littered with the wreckage of my belongings and the lingering sense of dread. Revelation of the dark past. In the aftermath of the night's horrors, I was determined to uncover the full truth behind the house's dark history. My research led me to a hidden room in the basement, concealed behind a false wall. Inside, I found a collection of documents and personal effects from previous occupants. Among these, there was a final diary, a tattered, blood-stained journal belonging to one of the house's last owners. The diary revealed the horrifying truth. The house had been the site of a series of occult rituals conducted by a secretive cult. The rituals were intended to summon and bind dark entities, but they had gone terribly wrong, resulting in the deaths of several participants and the unleashing of malevolent spirits. The final entries spoke of a growing presence that could not be contained, a dark force that would remain as long as the house stood. The documents and newspaper articles confirmed these revelations, detailing the gruesome events and the suffering of those who had lived there. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Everything I had experienced was connected to the house's cursed past. Conclusion and reflection. With the truth finally revealed, I knew I had to leave. The house, with all its malevolent forces, was no longer a place I could endure. I packed my belongings with trembling hands, leaving behind a place that had become a symbol of my torment. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house one last time, its windows dark and uninviting. The experiences had left me scarred, both emotionally and psychologically. I questioned my sanity, wondering if what I had endured was real or a product of my broken mind. The house had changed me forever, leaving me with a lingering sense of unease and fear. The story of the house didn't end with my departure. The dark forces that had haunted me seemed to whisper through the wind, suggesting that the evil within still lurked, waiting for its next victim. As I moved on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the malevolence of the house was far from over, and that the horrors I had witnessed might still be active, hidden in the shadows, waiting to strike again. Joao and the family. My name is Joao, and along with my wife Anna and our 2 young children, Pedro and Sofia, we were excited to start a new chapter in our lives. After years of the relentless hustle and bustle of city life, we decided to move to an old house in the countryside. It was a charming, historic home that promised the peace and tranquility we had longed for. The idea of wide-open spaces, fresh air, and the serenity of rural living was a dream come true for us. First signs of paranormal activity. From the very first day, however, things did not go as smoothly as we had hoped. As we settled into our new home, we began to notice strange occurrences that defied explanation. The doors seemed to have a mind of their own, locking and unlocking themselves without anyone touching them. One evening, while unpacking in the living room, Anna and I heard eerie, disembodied laughter echoing through the empty hallways. It was a high-pitched, childlike giggle that sent shivers down our spines. The shadows in the house also began to behave oddly. No matter how well-lit the rooms were, dark shapes seemed to flit around the corners of our vision. At first, we dismissed these sightings as tricks of the light or our imagination. But as the days passed, these occurrences grew more frequent and unsettling. Initial reactions of the family. Joao and I did our best to remain calm and rational, trying to reassure Pedro and Sofia that it was just the excitement of moving to a new place causing their fears. We told them that the house was simply old and that creaky doors and odd noises were normal. However, despite our attempts to provide comfort, our children's fears became increasingly apparent. Pedro would wake up crying from nightmares, and Sofia clung to us, her eyes wide with fright. As the strange events continued, our initial explanations began to wear thin. The house's peculiar behavior started to take its toll on us, but we held on to the hope that these were just the normal quirks of an old home. Little did we know, this was only the beginning of a much darker experience awaiting us. Intensification of terror. Escalation of paranormal events. As days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences in our new home escalated beyond anything we could have anticipated. The doors that had once merely locked themselves now began to slam open and shut with a force that rattled the entire house. The unsettling noises, thunderous bangs, and scraping sounds became a nightly ordeal, echoing through the hallways with an almost deliberate intent to terrorize. The children's laughter, which had initially been eerie, now grew louder and more disturbing. It was no longer just the sound of innocent giggles. It was accompanied by unsettling whispers, muttering voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. These whispers were indecipherable yet menacing, adding to the atmosphere of dread that had settled over the house. The shadows, too, became more pronounced and aggressive. They no longer merely flickered at the edges of my vision. They moved with purpose. Dark shapes seemed to slither across walls and floors, their movements deliberate and hostile. It felt as if these shadows were following us, observing our every move with a dark, predatory gaze. Investigation of the house's history. Desperate to understand what was happening, Anna and I decided to delve into the history of our new home. We began by searching through local archives and talking to longtime residents. What we uncovered was a chilling revelation. The house had a dark past marred by a series of tragic events. We found old newspaper clippings detailing unexplained deaths and disappearances of previous occupants. There were reports of mysterious accidents and strange occurrences that mirrored our own experiences. We also discovered a hidden room in the basement, where we found old diaries and personal documents from former residents. One diary, in particular, caught my attention. Its pages were filled with accounts of fear and desperation, chronicling experiences eerily similar to ours: disembodied voices, moving shadows, and terrifying apparitions. It became clear that the house had been a magnet for dark forces, and the horror we were experiencing was nothing new. Impact on the family. The intensification of the paranormal activity began to take a heavy toll on us. Anna and I were constantly on edge, our exhaustion mounting with each sleepless night. The stress of living in a house plagued by malevolent forces began to wear us down. The once comforting idea of a fresh start in the countryside had turned into a nightmare that we could not escape. Pedro and Sofia were deeply affected as well. Their nighttime fears escalated into severe anxiety. Pedro developed a fear of the dark, and Sofia would often wake up screaming, her cries echoing through the house. The tension between Anna and me grew as we struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy while grappling with the terror that surrounded us. Life in the house became increasingly unbearable. The house, which was supposed to be a sanctuary, had become a prison of fear. The growing sense of dread made every moment of our daily lives a battle against the dark forces that seemed intent on driving us away. Confrontation and attempted escape. Climax of terror. The situation reaches a critical point with a particularly terrifying paranormal event. This could be a powerful physical manifestation, such as a ghostly apparition or a direct attack on the family. The fear and desperation are palpable, and the house seems to be alive with malevolent energy. Attempted escape. João and Anna desperately try to flee the house but find that the doors are locked and the windows impossible to open, as if the house itself is imprisoning them. They face a frantic struggle to protect their children and find a way out. Conclusion and reflection. Ultimately, the family manages to escape, but not before a final, horrifying confrontation. They leave the property, but the experience leaves lasting scars. João and Anna reflect on the trauma and fear they endured, with the story ending on a note suggesting that the evil may still linger in the house, waiting for new occupants. Background on Father Miguel. Father Miguel Alvarez is a name whispered with reverence and unease within the church. With over 2 decades of experience as an exorcist, he has become a stalwart defender against the forces of darkness. His journey began in a small seminary, where his exceptional aptitude for understanding spiritual warfare quickly set him apart. Trained under the guidance of some of the most esteemed exorcists, Father Miguel's education was rigorous, encompassing ancient rituals, psychological assessments, and a deep study of demonology. Throughout his career, Father Miguel has confronted a myriad of demonic possessions and supernatural disturbances. From haunted convents to cursed family homes, his cases have ranged from unsettling to outright horrifying. His reputation as a fearless and effective exorcist grew with each successful case, earning him the respect of both his peers and those he helped. He is known for his ability to remain composed under the most intense and terrifying circumstances, a skill honed through countless confrontations with malevolent entities. Father Miguel's calm demeanor is often described as a pillar of strength. He approaches each case with a deep and abiding faith, drawing upon his spiritual training and personal beliefs to guide him through the darkest of battles. His unwavering commitment to confronting evil is matched only by his compassion for those tormented by the supernatural. In the face of danger, he remains a beacon of hope, using his extensive knowledge and unshakable resolve to combat the darkest forces that seek to prey upon the innocent. In the eyes of the Church, Father Miguel is more than just an exorcist. He is a guardian against the abyss, a figure of immense courage and faith, entrusted with the sacred duty of battling the most formidable demonic forces. The case of the possessed young woman. The possessed young woman. Emily Carter was a vibrant 22-year-old woman, known for her bright smile and compassionate nature. A college student studying literature, She was close with her family and had a promising future ahead of her. However, her life took a nightmarish turn when she began exhibiting unsettling symptoms that defied all rational explanation. The changes started subtly. Emily began to withdraw from her friends and family, her once lively demeanor replaced by an eerie sense of detachment. At first, her family attributed her behavior to stress or perhaps a temporary bout of depression. But as weeks went by, the symptoms grew more disturbing. Emily experienced sudden, violent mood swings, shifting from calm to rage without warning. Her physical appearance also started to change. Her once gentle eyes took on a cold, hollow stare, and she developed an unnatural pallor that seemed to sap her vitality. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Emily began speaking in tongues, uttering phrases in languages she had never studied. Strange marks appeared on her body, scratches and bruises that seemed to manifest without any discernible cause. Her strength seemed to increase inexplicably, making it difficult for her family to manage her during episodes of violent outbursts. The final straw came when Emily's family witnessed her body contorting in unnatural ways, her voice deepening and taking on a guttural, menacing tone that chilled them to the bone. Father Miguel's involvement. Concerned and desperate, Emily's family reached out to local priests and counselors, hoping for answers. Despite their best efforts, none could provide a satisfactory explanation or effective remedy. As Emily's condition continued to worsen, rumors of her plight reached Father Miguel. Known for his success with particularly challenging cases, he was called in to assess the situation. Upon arriving at the Carter home, Father Miguel was immediately struck by the gravity of Emily's condition. The atmosphere in the house was thick with an oppressive, malevolent energy that made the air feel heavy and stifling. The signs of possession were unmistakable: the unnatural strength, the disturbing physical changes, and the eerie, otherworldly manifestations. Father Miguel quickly realized that Emily's case was unlike any he had encountered before. The malevolent force within her was not only powerful, but also unusually cunning. The demon appeared to take pleasure in taunting Father Miguel, exhibiting a level of intelligence and malice that suggested it was well-versed in psychological warfare. The entity's ability to manipulate Emily's symptoms and play on the fears of those around her made it clear that this was no ordinary possession. Father Miguel knew he was about to face one of the most challenging battles of his career,
spiritual battle and
with
dark
Emily's
revelations
life hanging precariously in the balance. The exorcism began at dusk, a time when the veil between the physical and spiritual realms seemed thinnest. Father Miguel, clad in his traditional vestments, prepared the room with a solemn ritual. He laid out the necessary tools: holy water, blessed candles, and the sacred texts. As he recited ancient prayers and invoked the power of the divine, the air grew colder and an oppressive weight settled over the room. Emily, bound to her bed, writhed in agony as the demon within her responded to the incantations. Her body contorted unnaturally, her screams echoing with a guttural, otherworldly timbre. The walls seemed to pulsate with dark energy, and the lights flickered violently. The demon manifested in grotesque, shifting shapes, shadows with jagged edges and eyes that glowed with a malevolent light. Throughout the exorcism, the demon taunted Father Miguel with cruel, mocking laughter. It knew every weakness and fear that Father Miguel harbored. It used these vulnerabilities against him, attempting to break his resolve. The demon's voice was a cacophony of hissing whispers and thunderous roars, making it nearly impossible to concentrate. Each time Father Miguel thought he was gaining ground, the entity would lash out with renewed fury, throwing furniture and sending a wave of icy cold through the room. Dark revelations. As the exorcism progressed, the demon began to reveal unsettling truths. It spoke of ancient rituals, blood sacrifices, and the dark history of Emily's own family, which had been tainted by occult practices long before her birth. The demon claimed that Emily was merely a vessel, chosen due to her family's cursed past. The entity's revelations grew increasingly personal and horrifying. It made disturbing threats against Emily, promising that even if she were freed, her life would be eternally marked by the dark forces. It also targeted Father Miguel directly, threatening to expose and exploit his own fears. It whispered vile secrets about his past, hinted at failures in his other exorcisms, and even alluded to personal tragedies that had haunted him throughout his life. Father Miguel struggled to maintain his composure as the demon's threats became more intimate, preying on his deepest insecurities. The entity's cruel taunts sought to undermine his faith and resolve, hoping to use his inner turmoil as a weapon. The epic spiritual battle. The final confrontation was nothing short of epic. The room erupted in supernatural chaos. Fire and shadows clashed, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled the space. Father Miguel, despite his exhaustion and fear, pressed on with unyielding determination. The struggle became a test of faith and endurance as he fought not only to save Emily but also to preserve his own spiritual integrity. The battle reached its zenith when the demon unleashed its full, terrifying power. It seemed as though the very fabric of reality was being torn apart, with swirling vortices of darkness threatening to consume everything. Father Miguel, driven by his unwavering faith and sheer willpower, faced the entity head-on. The intensity of the confrontation left him physically battered and spiritually scarred. Each incantation and prayer was a struggle, each moment an exercise in sheer will. In the end, Father Miguel managed to expel the demon, but the victory came at a high cost. Emily was freed, but the ordeal had left deep psychological and spiritual wounds on both her and Father Miguel. The house, once a battleground of darkness, seemed to sigh with relief as the malevolent force was banished. However, the scars of the battle would forever mark their lives, a constant reminder of the struggle against the abyss.